Hello, my name is Todd Huizinga, and I'm the Senior Fellow for Europe for the Religious Freedom Institute. I'm honored to be here as a part of the Author's Corner interview series that RFI is doing. And today we're going to be interviewing Arielle Del Turco and Lela Gilbert, two of the co-authors of a great new book, Heroic Faith, Hope Amid Global Persecution. So let me begin by giving you a little bit of background on Arielle and Lela. Arielle is the Assistant Director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. She's responsible for international religious freedom policy and advocacy efforts. She holds a master's degree in government with an emphasis on international relations from Regent University, as well as a bachelor's degree in politics and history. She's written widely for a variety of publications, and really glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And we also have Lela Gilbert here. Lela is the Senior Fellow for International Religious Freedom and Coalitions Coordinator at the Family Research Council, where she brings a lengthy record of advocating for persecuted believers and addressing current-day faith and freedom issues. Lela writes and speaks about the intensifying persecution of Christians, anti-Semitism, and abuses of religious minorities across the world. Lela has authored or co-authored more than 60 books, including Saturday People, Sunday People, Israel Through the Eyes of a Christian Sojourner, and Persecuted, The Global Assault on Christians. Her work has also appeared widely in a variety of publications, and Lela, we're very glad to have you here. So we're talking about this book, Heroic Faith, Hope Amid Global Persecution. Now, I know that the persecution of Christians especially is growing throughout the world. So how did you go about writing this book? How would you summarize the book?
It's an overview of the worst case scenarios in the world. We've tried to focus on the cases that are most relevant to the issue and how they're growing and increasing. We divided it into different regions of the world and countries in those regions, and that would be, we looked at Asia and of course China and North Korea, looked at the Middle East, we looked at Africa, and then we had a chapter also on Afghanistan because of the current issue there. Mm-hmm. So it's divided up that way, and we just approached it by looking at cases of real people and what happened to them, and then explaining what underlies that problem.
Yes, and I suppose it's very easy for me to say, living in the United States, but I really like the fact that you've entitled the book Hope Amid Global Persecution, because that's what the Christian faith is all about, isn't it? And it is amazing, is it not, how Christianity has survived and thrived amid persecution ever since its advent. And so please tell me a little bit about the hope aspect of the book.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, people can maybe be intimidated to approach a book about Christian persecution just because it is such a heavy topic, so hard to read sometimes and listen to and hear about the real experiences that people are facing all the way around the world, and it can be very discouraging. But we really, through our research in a lot of countries, really found this thread of hope in that persecution is not going to eliminate the church. It will not crush the hope of the gospel. We just had a breakout panel today where Bishop Jude Arogundade spoke, a bishop from a very difficult region in Nigeria right now, where in one of his churches, in just one attack alone, 41 people were killed on a Sunday.
Amazing.
So he's been through so much, and yet what he said was that persecution is never going to eliminate Christianity. We will still be Christians because we believe in this message, we believe in the hope of the gospel. So we find that thread all throughout the world, and so that's where we find the hope and why we included it in our subtitle.
That's excellent. And you know, as I see it, I mean, I work mainly on Europe issues, so I don't know as much about the parts of the world where persecution is very, very severe, which you've concentrated on in your book. But you know, there's kind of two types of persecution, and you've already mentioned China and Nigeria. And actually, as far as I know, those are examples of the two different types. There's government persecution, which is the main problem in China, and then there's cultural persecution, or persecution by members of a different religion or different religions, as it is the case in Nigeria. Could you talk a little bit about that, the difference between government persecution and, let's say, cultural persecution?
Well, I would say that a good example is the contrast between Nigeria and China, but I would also say that the governments also turn a blind eye sometimes. Mm-hmm. So it becomes supported in a sort of strange way by them turning away and not addressing it. And there are many issues that are blamed for that. But we see that very much in Nigeria, where the government, in fact, President Trump actually addressed this issue with the president of Nigeria and said, are you doing anything about this? And President Buhari just sat there and did nothing, and it's gotten progressively worse. Whether he is complicit or whether he is simply turning a blind eye, we don't know, but we suspect that he's complicit because of his own orientation religiously.
Yes.
I also want to add that they often feed each other. We find that in circumstances of government persecution, like in Pakistan with blasphemy laws, we find that it also breeds this social discrimination and honestly attacks, mob violence against Christians across Pakistan, in part because they have the excuse of this blasphemy law on the books. And then we also see in China, I was speaking to a Chinese Christian recently, and she was talking about how it wasn't just that she was a pastor's kid, her father was a house church pastor, and he was imprisoned. But it wasn't just the government doing the persecuting. The community, when they saw her father go to prison, really kind of bullied her and her family and blamed her father for being in prison rather than the law. So we find that they often feed each other.
Yes, that's a very good point. Things often come from the top down, right? And the top is the government, basically. I know that in your book you also talk about the U.S. government and what it has done and could do in order to alleviate the problem of global persecution. Could you give me some examples of that?
Well, one of the things that we've talked about, and you may know more about this than I do, but the country of particular concern is a designation that the State Department makes on certain countries. And that means sanctions and more severe prices are paid. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this happen where it was designated at one point and then for no explanation it was removed. That happened in Nigeria. It's also happened in other countries. But that's the strongest thing that can be done. And that has to go through lobbying. It has to be us talking to the government saying, look what's happening here. And it requires some political pressure on our part. It depends on the administration as to whether they are concerned about Christians, because what we do is generally about Christian persecution, although we are concerned about others as well. But that's our general focus. So it's not so simple as it might be to get something designated and then redesignated. Yes. Because it depends on the mood of the administration.
Yes. Yeah. So what could the United States, is there anything in general that the United States could do better than it has or than it now is? How could it improve?
Well, we find that the law on the books is actually quite good as far as a government in the West that is focused on combating persecution abroad. We have the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, and that really created a lot of mechanisms for the U.S. government to address persecution in other countries, like the country of particular concern list, as Lela mentioned. But a part of the problem is, and Lela alluded to this, is that the government, especially depending on the politics of the day, doesn't always follow through and really use the law to its full potential. So even on the country of particular concern issue alone, there are probably more countries that are of particular concern than are on the CPC list. But even for the countries that are on the CPC list, most of them receive complete waivers from all the consequences that they're supposed to have. They're supposed to have an economic penalty of some sort. These are almost always waived with the excuse that it's in the national interest of America, but really our leaders need to have a bit of a stronger commitment to enforcing this law.
Yes, yes. I remember that Mike Pompeo, when he was Secretary of State, said something about that the United States needed to always raise a moral voice of advocacy for Christians and other religions that were being persecuted abroad. I wonder if that's one of our goals, kind of in the religious freedom movement, to get the United States to actually consistently follow through on that, you know?
Right, right. And not just for Christians. I mean, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, in Russia have been mistreated for years. And I believe Russia is a CPC. I don't think anything much has happened with regard to that. But yes, I mean, it isn't just for Christians, but we focus on that because we're a Christian organization and that's our calling. But I don't know how America would do that with atheism becoming such an issue. Speaking in the name of God to an atheist country like China, it's laughable to them, you know. So I don't know how that would happen, but it would be wonderful if we had the courage to do it, in spite of what the response might be.
Yeah. You also talk in the book about individuals and what individuals can do to alleviate persecution. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, we really wanted to bring this home to the individual level. This can be a big topic and we're all experts on the issue, so we know the ins and outs, but we really wanted this book to be approachable to the average constituent or the average American Christian. So we wanted to give them action items. We didn't want to just give them a list of what's going wrong in the world, and we wanted to give them something to do. So the three main points that we boil everything down to is just praying and remembering the persecuted. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from persecuted believers in these other countries that they want to know that people remember them. And even American pastor Andrew Brunson, he spent 2 years imprisoned in Turkey. And one of the things he said while in prison was that it was such a great encouragement to hear reports that people were praying for him. People around the world, even people in China, a nation that also experiences persecution, they were praying for him. So we can do that. We can also advocate. We live in a democracy. We have elected representatives, but the thing about that is that they're not going to care about issues that we don't care about as constituents, and we don't forcefully let them know that we care about. So American constituents really need to be raising that issue more politically, and then also just creatively engage. I think there are a lot of ways in our normal life, probably more than we realize through social media or even word of mouth, that we can let our friends and just people in our lives know what we care about. And that's really key to doing something, is mobilization, even at the grassroots level and at an individual level.
Okay, so three main things: pray, advocacy with your political leaders, congressmen and members of the Senate, and then get the word out, basically. Okay, that's excellent. So I once heard from a Chinese Christian that they in China, Chinese Christians, were praying for us Americans, American Christians. And he said that they were doing that because they know that we have it so good, both in terms of religious freedom and in terms of material well-being and peace and so forth, that it's a great temptation to get lax in our Christianity. I don't know if that's in your book or not, but I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I think it's absolutely true, and I think we've seen, even in recent years, the loss of interest, not only in international religious freedom, but in Christianity itself, and a backing off, and just a slacking. And I think they're right to pray for us, and I hope they are praying for us, because I think secularism has become a religious issue. It's become a religion of a sort. And it carries with it some morality issues that are polluting our schools and everything else. So we do need prayer. But I think as we look at other Christians, from our point of view, it helps us be stronger, to see the courage that these people will die with a knife at their throat before they'll deny their faith.
Amazing, yeah.
I don't know, I just am in awe of that, and I've seen it over and over. I mean, we've seen this story, and we heard it today, that, you know, they will not change. So I think they inspire us, and I'm glad they're praying for us as well, because we need it.
Excellent. So Lela, you just alluded to what was going to be my next question. I'd be very interested to hear from both of you how your faith has grown through writing this book and through your advocacy for persecuted Christians and your knowledge in getting to know persecuted Christians.
Well, for me, as I said, it's challenging. It's also, I find myself wanting to detach when I pray for them, and I think spiritually I'm in tears sometimes when I try to pray for these people. And I think that's the work of the Lord in my life. I think I've learned to harden myself over many years of things going on. And the more I pray for Nigeria, for China, for North Koreans in these horrible places, I'm moved to tears. And I think I'm encouraged by that, because it's not my nature. It's easy to detach, but I think the Lord's really done a work in me to soften my heart.
Yeah, as Lela mentioned, it's very convicting to hear their stories and to hear what they'll die for. So that's certainly been convicting, just to make myself to ask myself that question, like, what do I have what it takes to get to that point? If it cost me everything, would I still boldly profess the gospel? But then also, it's just interesting to think about how much we need each other. Lela talked about our Christians in China praying for us. That's important, and we should be praying for them too. They certainly want that. They have a lot to teach us. I think we in the West really ignore that to our detriment, what they have to teach us. Even I remember at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, I often pointed people to, okay, what have churches in China do? Because they were already dealing with the pandemic and have dealt with pandemics. What did they do to continue practicing their faith and continue holding church services? So we have a lot we can learn from them.
Yeah. So we really want people to read this book. And so could you give us just one taste to end the interview, kind of? Just one taste of a particular story that you tell in the book. You don't have to tell the whole story, but a story of a particularly inspiring, moving, difficult situation.
Well, I would speak about Leah Sharibu, who was 14 years old when she was kidnapped by Boko Haram in Nigeria. And all the girls that were taken, and there were several hundred, were released because they were Muslim. And she was the only one that refused to convert. And she was kept, and to this day remains in captivity. And this is a 14-year-old girl, and you think about teenagers here in our world, and I still am awed by her. She's another one that brings tears to my eyes, because she now has 2 children by her captors.
My goodness.
And we've just celebrated her 4th year of captivity. So that story to me is so amazing, first of all, that she kept her faith, and I pray she's kept it through the whole thing. I just don't know what it must be like for her. That's a very moving story for me.
Yes, absolutely.
For me, I might point to the story of Ji Hyuna, a North Korean defector. She escaped from North Korea into China 3 times. 2 of the times she was caught by Chinese authorities and sent back to North Korea. And of course, for defectors who are returned to North Korea, they are going to a prison camp. They're going to be punished harshly. And if they catch any word that you were associated with Christianity in China, you are in trouble. So she, in one of the times that she was forced back into North Korea. She was pregnant, and North Korea does not accept mixed children from half Chinese parents, which this would have been. So she underwent a brutal, very brutal forced abortion. But yet, in the middle of that forced abortion, in the middle of surgery, without painkillers, she experienced a very powerful move of God that really touched her heart. And I won't tell the whole story because I want people to buy the book, but deeply, deeply impactful to hear what these people go through and how they hold on to their faith.
Yeah. And these stories are happening all over the world, and they're happening as we speak to, we could say, millions of Christians.
Millions, multiple millions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this interview. I think the book is highly recommendable. And I just want to say, please pick up this book, Heroic Faith, Hope Amid Global Persecution. Thank you so much for being here, Lela. Thank you, Arielle.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, and thank you for listening.